the incident has all the hallmarks of a false flag operation. And this is, I think, one of the objectives of what Israel has done in Majdal Shaams. Throw sand in the eyes of the world, try to recover some lost sympathy, to portray themselves as victims using the blood, literally the blood of Arab child martyrs to do so. How disgusting, how low, even for Israel, that is low.
Hi everyone, this is Syrian Girl. It has been a long time since I have had Ambassador Peter Ford on my channel, and I am honored to have him on again. He was the former British ambassador to Bahrain and Syria, and I must say, out of all the ambassadors Syria has had, you have been the best. And he is currently now the deputy leader of George Galloway's Workers' Party of Britain. And some of their stances, because you might be surprised at how based some of these positions are. I really was happy to hear about them. So I know you were ambassador in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yes, I went to Bahrain in 1999 and transferred to Syria in 2002, when there were high hopes in the West that Bashar al-Assad would come over to the West. And there was a kind of honeymoon, you will remember. In fact, I arrived in Damascus 1 month after President Assad had tea with the Queen of England in Buckingham Palace.
Yes,
so
I
relations were in an unusually tranquil state. Of course, all that started to change with the Iraq war. And soon I was being given instructions to go and bang on the table and order Syria not to give any support to the forces that were opposing the war on the neighbor, Iraq. And then at the end of my time as ambassador, I transferred to the United Nations. And I went down the road to Amman to work for UNRWA, which, as you know, is the UN agency which helps Palestine refugees. But I was still going back and to Syria, a country which has been a very generous host to 250,000 Palestinian refugees. And I was also going back and to Gaza, where there were about 1 million Palestine, or more than 1 million Palestinian refugees. And I was helping to raise funds to help with the reconstruction of Gaza after previous Israeli attacks on that unfortunate strip. But I have seen that Gaza can revive. Of course, the scale will be much bigger after this war is over, but Gaza can rise from the ashes. I'm very confident that Gaza in a few years' time will be thriving economically, socially, and I hope politically. It can be done. And the Gulf Arab countries will, I'm very confident, step up to the plate as they did before.
In your experience, would you describe what we're seeing now as a genocide in Gaza?
Yes, well, we can only echo the words of the International Criminal Court, which has spoken of grounds for believing that there is a plausible genocide occurring. And in fact, we just use our eyes and our common sense, and every day it gets worse. And this is one of the horrible things about it, that it's been going on so long and so continuously day after day that the world is becoming numb. We are no longer feeling the daily pain that the Gazans are enduring. It's becoming the new normal. And the barrier before we get indignant about Israel's despicable, vile behavior, the barrier gets higher and higher. They have got Western publics and governments used to their excesses, which are now seen as normal. This is perhaps the most worrying aspect of this crisis and the legacy that it will leave, not just for Gaza, but future conflicts around the world. The Israelis have established new red lines because they have no red lines. The Israelis could feed Gazan children into a meat grinder and the Americans would say it's an act of self-defense.
So we're moving back to Syria. There was a shelling of a football field in Majdal Shaams, which is in the Golan Heights, which is a Syrian territory. And Majdal Shaams is a Syrian city with Syrian citizens in it. So my first question would be, do you have any statement about the Golan Heights?
I was shocked reading the Sunday papers. I saw a headline in the Sunday Times, which is supposed to be a newspaper of repute. The headline was Hezbollah attacks northern Israel. Northern Israel! My God, this is occupied Syrian territory. And yesterday, the Daily Mail was speaking about Israeli children being killed, when, as you mentioned, they are Syrian children who have been killed in the occupied territories. The British government has made statements about what happened, has not been able to bring itself to mention these facts. It talks ambiguously about the Golan Heights. It doesn't want to identify who the victims are. It's disgusting. And this is, I think, one of the objectives of what Israel has done in Majdal Shaams. Throw sand in the eyes of the world, try to recover some lost sympathy, to portray themselves as victims using the blood, literally the blood of Arab child martyrs to do so. How disgusting, how low, even for Israel, that is low, to use the blood of child martyrs to recover their own lost prestige and sympathy.
But it seems to be the case that not only have these states sort of de facto agreed to the genocide of Gaza, but now they're weakening their stance on the position of the Golan Heights as a Syrian territory. And this is actually quite a frightening scenario because it will eventually become returned to Syria's hands by means of warfare. And these states are going to have to make their position clear on that.
Absolutely, and we were recently reminded and had it confirmed by the International Court of Justice just days ago with a judgment on the illegality of Israeli occupation, not just of Palestinian territories, but also Syrian and Lebanese territories in the Golan Heights. There is absolutely, I think the United States is alone in the world in recognizing the Golan Heights annexation by Israel. But I'm sure this has been one of the Israeli objectives in this whole incident, to have the Golan Heights spoken about as though they were Israeli territory and the population were Israelis. I suspect also that the Israelis have been trying to cause problems with the Druze, between the Druze community of Lebanon and the other communities in Lebanon. I mean, there are complicated intra-Druze politics going on here, with one or two of the spiritual Druze leaders controlled by the Israelis, Israeli puppets, getting into dispute with Walid Jumblat, who is regarded by most Lebanese Druze as the leader, or the political leader anyway, of their community. I think the Israelis have been exploiting this incident to try to stir up trouble inside Lebanon, and it's not working, thanks to the action of Sheikh Walid and thanks to the diplomacy of Hassan Nasrallah in his interactions with Sheikh Walid.
Would you consider then the possibility that Israel murdered these children, they had a motive to murder these Syrian children, and blame Hezbollah?
Well, the incident has all the hallmarks of a false flag operation. I don't have sufficient detailed intelligence to be able to assert this as a fact, but as a theory, I find it more credible, far more credible than the Israeli and American and British official theory that Hezbollah deliberately targeted a Druze Arab village on Syrian territory. I mean, how naive do you have to be to believe that? a target with no military significance, when Hezbollah targeting is always very clearly targeted on the military, and that is shown in the proportion, the very low proportion of Israeli civilians who've been harmed by Hezbollah attacks. They always go for military targets. So it is literally, I think, incredible that Hezbollah could have deliberately carried out this attack. On the same day, Hezbollah were attacking a number of targets on Mount Hermon, not very far away. It's possible that the damage was caused by the Israeli anti-air, anti-missile missiles, the Iron Dome system, or it could have been deliberate on Israel's part. Certainly, Israel's actions afterwards show that they wanted to exploit potential division inside Lebanon. They wanted to gather sympathy for themselves after the setbacks, the immense setbacks that they have received recently at the hands of the ICC and the ICJ. I think this figured very prominently in their thinking. Oh, let's change the script, let's get some more sympathy going again. And that is far more credible than the theory that Hezbollah attacked Arab children. How stupid can you get, and how naive to believe it?
Since the current events on October 7th, what have you been doing lately that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, I've been mainly active supporting George Galloway and his party, the Workers' Party of Britain. This is a fairly new party. It actually started in a small way in 2019, but it really only came alive about a year ago. And at that point, I was persuaded to join and become deputy leader. And very soon after that, the Gaza crisis erupted. And the Workers' Party then became very prominent in the controversy, the debate that went on in British politics, and which culminated in a partial election, a by-election, we call it, in Rochdale, near Manchester, a by-election which became a referendum on the British government's Gaza policy, and which resulted in an overwhelming victory for George Galloway, an outsider coming from absolutely nowhere. We had never had any kind of base in Manchester before, but we came from nowhere to scoring a big victory back in February. And this changed the terms of the debate about Gaza and Palestine in Britain more widely. Other people jumped on the bandwagon. Some prominent independents started to come forward as well. And these independents, all of them Muslim, I must mention, made Palestine almost a unique platform. And they were rewarded at the general election, which took place 3 weeks ago. And 4 of these independent pro-Gaza candidates won, again, coming from nowhere and overturning massive majorities held by the Labour Party, which is now the government, but before the election was the official opposition, but not a real opposition, because they were following the government on Gaza and Israel and almost everything else. So the Workers' Party helped to spark a rebellion, which is not over yet, not by any means. And although George Galloway was defeated narrowly in Rochdale in the general election, this was after the Labour Party put in massive resources. They were receiving millions of pounds. It's no different from American politics. Britain has the best democracy that money can buy. And the Labour Party have lots of money. And the Workers' Party depend entirely on subscriptions from members. We count in pennies. Labour count in millions of pounds. So they threw massive resources, and they had the entire mainstream media on their side, while we were deprived completely of mainstream media coverage, except negative. And even then, we came very close to winning. But with the reverberations continue. We were the beginning of a political earthquake. George Galloway, when he won in February, said, "This is for Gaza. and this will ring around the world. This was like the shot back in about the year 1780, when American rebels first fired a shot against the British occupiers of America. And the reverberations continue to this day. We are seeing the Labour Party, now the ruling party, coming under immense pressure to impose an arms embargo on Israel. And they have also been forced to withdraw the previous government's request to the International Court of Justice not to proceed with the case against Netanyahu. So this is just the beginning. The Workers' Party, we got in the election, we fielded 152 candidates, and we got overall over 200,000 votes. We are now the 6th biggest party in Britain, and all this coming from nowhere on the back of an envelope with no money. So what can we do as we start to mobilize more support? And this we will do, working first of all at the level of local councils. We already have half a dozen local councillors in the Manchester area, and we will soon have many more. And there will soon also be more by-elections, partial elections, when we expect again to make Palestine the center of the debate.
So it was very, very bizarre to see you win in February and then only a few months later lose the seat. It's illogical to think that people simply change their minds. So obviously we immediately thought there's some tomfoolery afoot, something doesn't make logical sense. You described well how money can buy democracy, essentially. But is there any indication that there was anything more sinister going on in terms of election tampering?
Yes, there were documented instances of intimidation of our supporters as they went round the streets of Rochdale. Some of them were threatened. I myself witnessed one of these ugly incidents. Of course, it's very hard to pin responsibility on any party, but we can all use our brains and our imagination.
Yes.
There were also strange happenings with some of the ballot boxes as they were delivering postal votes, which somehow got delayed and which arrived at the counting station having already been opened, and strangely not including the proportion of votes for George Galloway that you would expect, comparing the boxes from other areas. So yeah, there were many signs that not everything was correct in the way the election was held. The Labour Party were determined to defeat George Galloway because he is such a catalyst of opposition, such a figurehead. But George will live to fight another day. And in the meanwhile, he has a very important social media presence with a very well-viewed platform called Mother of All Talk Shows. And people
Yes,
can
he's
watch
interviewed me a few times on there. I've been honored to be there.
Yeah.
But he does. He's a fantastic orator as well. So I also noted some of your policies. People would be surprised that not only are they supportive of Palestine and workers' rights, but they're also, they don't support, for example, this climate alarmism and net zero push while destroying, workers' rights. And they have a very conservative stance on cultural conservatism. So they deny the ability for people to self-identify gender. Now, this sort of thing is surprising because usually you have a very big divide between left and right, where you have in America like the anti-worker Republicans are anti climate change and anti LGBT, sort of. I mean, they're not really all the time that way now anyway. And the left being the sort of opposite of that, so it's woke leftism. But you have here taken maybe the best from both. And I'd like for you to describe a little bit of that policy for the listeners and why it makes your party more interesting.
Yeah, it's very simple. The Workers' Party is basically a traditional workerist party. We put the stress on working class, on conservative values. We are not ashamed to say that we are supportive of conservative social values. We think that the modern way of life, the capitalist way of life, has introduced many distortions. We're not afraid to call ourselves a populist party. And we share some of the views and attitudes of people who are described as being on the right. We don't completely freak out like many progressives when they hear the name Donald Trump, dreadful as that man is on the subject of Israel and Palestine. But on other issues like Russia and social issues, we actually find a number of common points. And this viewpoint is largely overlooked in Western societies. The liberal progressives have dominated the discourse. They control the media, so that on many key issues there is no choice. On the issue of climate alarmism, there is no choice among the parties. You can have green, greener, or greenest. Well, we offer brown. And we are about certainly the only party of the so-called left. Actually, we don't like these terms left and right. We think they're completely out of date. They make no sense anymore. Look at the Greens. This is a Middle East party. George Galloway calls it the gardening wing of capitalism.
Backyard of capitalism.
Yeah, these people are very anti-Russia, especially in Germany. They are climate fanatics and Russophobic at the same time. We often make a totally different offer, and we think that we are on the right side of history here. By the way, I hate that term, being on the right side of history, because it was made popular by Barack Obama, and it's an American import. But you know what I mean.
Yes.
We feel that the tide of world public opinion is changing, that the climate alarmism has peaked, and we now need to exercise more common sense if we don't want to impoverish ourselves. Already, countries in the West, especially Germany and Britain, have been deindustrializing themselves because we have these high energy costs, which we've imposed on ourselves by a mad rush to go green and to increase our reliance on renewables. This is the economics of the madhouse. It's economic suicide. And in a few short years, this will be plain to everyone.
Thank you so much for coming on and giving us your expert analysis of the situation. And I hope to have you on again, because I fear that this is going to continue for quite some time and will, in my view, escalate at least in some shape or form. So I thank you again for coming on, and I hope you will join us again.
Thanks for having me, Maram. It's been a pleasure to see you again, and I'm open to further exchanges. Pleasure.